Vice President of the OUSC.
Hi everybody, thank you so much for coming to our second labor panel. We're so excited to be able to do this again. I'm so excited to see such a big turnout here. So yeah, the topic of labor and collective struggle is a huge issue. I think we all know in Michigan, but we've also had our own collective struggles here at Oakland University. Over the last few months, we've worked really hard alongside all these different groups, alongside YDSA and the AAUP and a lot of other groups to stop the East Campus Development Project, and that was like a huge, exciting moment for all of us. We could have done it without everyone's help, and it really showed us just how important collective action is on campus. And I'm just going to reaffirm it's the main priority of our administration at Student Congress, and we hope to continue these efforts. And this is like a nice sign to see that the collective action is vibrant and healthy on campus. That's always good to see. So we're happy to be putting this on for everybody, and thank you all for coming out. And I would like to introduce Karen Miller, the president of the AAUP.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I have the pleasure of introducing our four panelists today. This is actually, if you weren't here last year, this is a fairly informal event. So we have four presenters who are going to talk for, 7, 10 minutes, that sort of thing. Or 4 hours, we never know. But if you have a lot to say, we understand. And so I'm not sure if you want me to hand you the microphone, if you want to come up here, really whatever. And then at the end, we'll have questions from the audience. And so let me begin by introducing our four panelists. Andy Levin represented Michigan's 9th Congressional District from 2019 to 2023. Before that, he worked as a trade union organizer and also served on the U.S. Commission for the Future of Worker Management Relations. So he has deep and significant roots in the labor movement as an elected official. Carly Rose is a recent Oakland grad and has demonstrated that you can do a lot of things with an undergraduate degree in history. I had the wonderful pleasure of having Carly in class some time ago. But she took her basic interest in economic justice and is now an organizer for the AFL-CIO. Kay Oshigan is an associate professor in Wayne State University's Department of Communication. He is a specialist in areas of mass media and public opinion. He serves as the information officer on the executive committee of the Wayne State chapter of the AAUP-AFT. And finally, James Murray is a Wayne State grad and a former co-chair of the YDSA. He currently works, he used to be an organizer at AFT Michigan and has been a unionized barista at a Starbucks. And he currently works as a warehouse associate in a non-unionized shop, but hopes to see that change in the near future. And so...
Not the job.
Yes, I agree. Yes, that point of clarification. And so clearly these are four people who are going to have very different perspectives about the contemporary labor movement, and I know that they will share wonderful ideas with us today. So thank you very much. Sure. Exactly.
Well, I'm going to stand up. I'm not going to talk for 4 hours because I'm in charge of dinner tonight. So that would make my household mad. It's really great to be here, and I'm going to talk about kind of a little bit national historical perspective, but also like super local and this moment. So here we are, March 2023. Our country is in deep crisis. We have the worst income and wealth inequality in 100 years, and it's not getting fundamentally better as administrations change. We have crisis of structural racism. We have a healthcare crisis. We had a pandemic, but we're the only advanced economy in the world where significant numbers of people have no access to health insurance. Anyway, if you have health insurance, it's just, our system is insane. It makes no sense. It makes no sense for even from a capitalist perspective. There's no freedom of movement in the economy. You can't take your labor wherever you want. I got 4 kids. My 2 oldest kids both have Crohn's disease. They can't not have insurance. You know, they get infusions every 8 weeks. So they're not free to move about. They're not also, and they're in their 20s. They can't go off if they, you know, and travel somewhere because we don't provide health insurance. Anyway, that's a crisis. And we're frying our planet. We've been doing it since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. We've known pretty fully all about what we're doing since the 80s, and we've done precious little about it. I'm proud of what we did in the last Congress with the Inflation Reduction Act to get things going, but we have a huge crisis around that. And I could go on, but here's the thing. There's no way to really transform our economy to be a just economy and to really take on this income and wealth inequality. I would say to really get just policies across the state, across the spectrum, like taking on mass incarceration and so forth, unless we dramatically increase workers' freedom to form unions and bargain collectively in this country. The numbers for 2022 are out. Public sector unionization is down again. It's going down slightly. In the low 30s, we're down to 6.0% of private sector workers in this country having a union. Like we're asymptotically approaching zero. It's a huge crisis. And if you look at the last 100 years, and you take 2 figures, how much of the wealth is controlled by the top 10%, and the union density, what percentage of workers have a union. Those 2, it's a beautiful graph. Those 2 numbers mirror each other almost perfectly, decade after decade. The lower union density, the higher income inequality. And so we've got to do something about this. Now, we have just finished the first 2 years of the Biden presidency. The Republicans won control of the House, right? So now we can say that we've had 4 consecutive Democratic presidents, Carter, Clinton, Obama, and Biden, each of whom had at least 2 years of Democratic control, right, of both the House and the Senate while they were president. And neither in those years or any year before, literally since we passed the Wagner Act in 1935, the National Labor Relations Act, has Congress passed any piece of legislation, even any paragraph or sentence or comma, literally, that makes it easier for private sector workers to form unions and bargain collectively. It's unbelievable. And meanwhile, state laws and administrative decisions at the state and federal level and judicial cases at the state and federal level have whittled away at workers' power. And Democrats often participated. Deregulating trucking, deregulating airlines. Of course, the Taft-Hartley amendments in 1947 and the Landon-Griffin Act in 1959, 2 pieces of labor law that Congress did pass under Republican control of Congress, made matters worse. So, here's my belief. Anybody ever read The History of America in 10 Strikes by Eric Loomis? Okay, great book. I really recommend all y'all read that book. Y'all the academics. I'm just a union organizer congressman. So, it's really a great book. And why do I raise it? Eric Loomis is a socialist. He's a real lefty guy. He shows, and this history of 10 strikes, right? This goes back like at least the early 19th century. I forget if it goes to the late 18th century. Anyway, over the whole sweep of American history, workers can win when the government's for them. Workers can win when the government's kind of neutral. Workers basically never win when the government is with the boss against them. It's a brutal history. So, we've got a dialectic going on here. There's no way we're going to unleash mass organizing to restore worker voice and power in this country unless we have labor law reform. But the great mistake we've made is thinking we can sit around on our ass or elect good people or advocate in Washington or whatever, or even in Lansing, and that'll like do the trick. No amount of lovely conversations between, I assure you, senators and representatives will make labor law reform happen in this country. And it also didn't make it happen in 1935. It was workers organizing and kind of out of control, kind of pushing the envelope that made FDR wasn't for the Wagner Act when it was first introduced. It was a compromise that he agreed to. And obviously, if this needs saying, it was highly imperfect. Like, it purposely excluded specific categories of workers, domestic workers and farm workers. Because that, in 1935, that mostly meant black people, black women, and black sharecroppers in the South. And they wouldn't, Dixiecrats, Democrats in the South wouldn't vote for it unless that continuing exploitation of these workers was specifically allowed. So it's not like I'm looking to the past as a glorious thing, but here's the thing. What's happening in America right now? We had teachers before the pandemic, or in mostly red strikes, organizing, frankly, without immediate leadership of the AFT and the NEA at first, right, whichever their union was. From West Virginia, way out west. And the unions, credit to them, got involved and supported them and led. And we had that. And then we've had organizing across a wide spectrum of industries. So here's what I'm asking you. As a union of professors, a public sector union, there's no hope for public sector unionism without private sector unions being stronger, and vice versa. So, 2022 saw a kind of inspiring wave of organizing. Starbucks, Amazon, Trader Joe's, REI, gaming companies, right? Under American labor law in the private sector as it exists now, workers basically have no actual, practical, achievable right to ever get a first contract. About half the time they never do. It's outrageous. On paper, they sort of do. But here's what the paper means in the lived life of a company and their workers. I'm the boss, I show up, I don't really show up, I send some lawyers. Have 4 or 5 sessions. We're free to propose anything we want. If all y'all made $15 an hour, I can literally come to the table and propose $13 an hour and act like that's an acceptable proposal. There's no law that prevents that. Show up 4 or 5 times, declare, I guess we're at an impasse. You can go out on strike if you want, and then I permanently replace you. And that's your right to get a first contract in America. The labor law reform we proposed and we fought for in the last couple of Congresses, it's called the PRO Act, the Protecting the Right to Organize Act. The PRO Act has first contract arbitration, and basically in about 7 months, if the union's competent, and because it has to trigger mediation and then start binding arbitration. As long as the union's competent, you get a first contract within about 7 months every time. And you know what? 90% of bosses don't want to let an arbitrator decide the contract, right? So you typically get one faster because the boss doesn't want to trust what some outside person is going to decide. So we would solve this problem. But we're not getting a labor law reform until we have more organizing. So here's my ask of you. This year could be a terrible year. Because what happens if all those REI and Trader Joe's and Starbucks workers, they don't get first contracts, the employers all start decertification campaigns, and the workers basically are like, dang, that sucked. Here, look, what did we just go through, the 4 of us? You got fired, you got your shift made worse, we got harassed, and now we don't have anything to show for it. I guess this wasn't worth it. There's a huge danger of that. So, on March 22nd, this is so hilarious. Starbucks is having a special day on March 22nd, Founders Day, to thank Howard Schultz. I'm not joking. And March 23rd is their Shareholders Day. shareholders meeting. The Starbucks campaign has a real plan for escalating action. What if we make 2023 a year where the Starbucks campaign feels like some of us older folks, like the great, well, I was even a little kid, so the great boycotts of the late 60s and early 70s, where Americans pretty much, whether you participated or not, you kind of came to consciousness about what it was to be a farm worker in California. What if Americans could find out, because of this Starbucks activism, that there basically isn't a right to a first contract in America, in the private sector, and we have to pass labor law reform, or if we have a lot of fun, changing it. So anyway, adopt the Starbucks. We have unionized Starbucks in Bloomfield, in Clinton Township, and Royal Oak, and so forth. Get involved in that. UPS. The Teamsters' biggest single contract is UPS. It's up this summer. There's got to be an awesome campaign. Get involved. Talk to your UPS driver. I'm not kidding. Starting right now. If you work somewhere, you have the same person often. Build a relationship. Tell them you're behind them. And this union, as the AAUP and others, can have a chance to really participate in that campaign. We're going to have big three bargaining this year. Amazon. This year is going to have campaigns where all of us can get involved and really help determine the future of the working class in this country, both by helping workers win and by causing a crisis that I think can finally, the crisis it will take, let me put it that way, to finally achieve labor law reform in this country, and then unleash the kind of mass organizing we saw only once in the history of this country. The last time we passed labor law reform from the late 30s to the 40s and the early 50s. Thanks.
Thank you. My name is Carly Rose. I'm an organizer with Michigan AFL-CIO, the state federation. It's American Federation of Labor, Congress of Industrial Organizations, which has a very, very long history in the labor movement of being a coalition, essentially, of labor unions, a consortium meant to, represent all of the affiliated unions and fight for them in various ways. It's also a democratic institution, much like unions are democratic institutions. And first, I'd like to point out that, thank you so much for pushing the PRO Act and labor law reform, because that is just incredibly important, as I'll get into. But I also wanted to point out that Amy Levin used to swear first. So if I do it, it's okay. Just wanted to, you did. I spent a lot of time around building trades. I was much better at watching my words when I worked retail, believe it or not. But now that's not a skill that I need working in. So I apologize in advance. But yes, so labor law reform is it's an incredibly critical at this point in time, and some of the fights that I've been involved in with the AFL. My first project getting into labor organizing, I was doing community organizing before this. I started off in Flint with the water crisis, doing organizing as a volunteer with Michigan United. Though actually so I'll talk about some stuff that's been happening in the state legislature. So I've been spending a lot of time there these past couple weeks, but my last time in the House Gallery was in 2018 when I was there with Flint water crisis survivors fighting against closure of the water pods, which Rick Snyder had done in retaliation for then Mayor Karen Weaver not calling him a truther because he had gone back on some verbal commands, and so we actually protested and shut down the state legislative session that day. And we got water provided by Nestle, actually, back donated to Flint, and they proceeded to do that for years. So, yeah. So interestingly, right now, labor unions have a 70% approval rate across America. And I really think that this is something that is being led by a new generation, a new labor movement that's being led by young people, that's being led by people of color, that's being led by people who do not look like the previous generation or are the previous generation of labor leaders. But what I see as my position and my goal is to bring together the experience and the hard-fought battles of the labor movement that has existed up until this time, and all the gains that they've made and all the fights and wars that they've won, that they've weathered, that they've lost, and have that meet the moment and meet the day and age that we're seeing right now. And yes, that is Starbucks. That is organizations like, I gotta tell you, I've had calls originate mostly from DSA in Metro Detroit with organizing leads, with salting operations, with things that are happening that they are organizing and doing. Nobody gave them permission to, and they just did it anyway. And that's exactly the kind of stuff that we need to be meeting the moment for as a labor movement. And I have a couple of statistics I wanna bring up. One of that is a study during COVID with nursing homes, is that unionized nursing homes that had unionized staff had 11% lower mortality rate of COVID than non-unionized nursing homes. And if you have anything to do with the nursing industry right now, you know that there is I would say deliberate shortage of nurses and medical workers right now because of employers and because of their practices. I also saw a NPR article that made me want to cry and get in bed and never come out last week that said that private equity firms are now running ERs, and we can go to an ER and not see a doctor for hours and hours because they're limiting what they believe to be their greatest overcost, which is labor of doctors. And that is a real thing that is happening, and that is terrifying because, of course, all of us go to the ER to see a doctor. But all of these labor issues are coalescing around this moment. And it's a moment that from my labor history class with Dan Clark, Professor Dan Clark back there, I know this is not the first time that we've been here. This is not the first time where we've had a golden opportunity with a new generation, with people who are upstarts, with people who are willing to bring democracy and civil rights into the workplace. This is not the first time that we've been here. But this moment can go away if we don't rise to meet it. If labor unions don't try new things. If we don't have people pushing for every single aspect of labor law, every single aspect of in your workplace, in your university, in your schools, in all of our different workplaces and all of our different environments, that workers' rights are human rights. And what's so interesting to me is that in Michigan, we are in the middle of a fight to repeal right to work and restore prevailing wage. And those are two fights that I'll probably talk about more later, but those are two very, very important fights for the labor movement as a whole, because most of what these fights boil down to, regardless of the messaging you may have seen, is about power and about money. And I can tell you that unions, for a very long time, their ability to message to their members was coveted jealously by corporations. That their ability to raise and wield power and money was coveted jealously by corporations who found that they were losing again and again in Washington, D.C., and oh gosh, we have to recognize unions, we have to pay people what they're worth, we can't have this. So they banded together and got things like corporate PACs going, super PACs going, in order to curb workers' rights in the workplace. And we've seen that now have a snowball effect to now when you have to go get a bottle of insulin, it costs you upwards of $500. And all of these things are tied to workers' rights and to labor's rights. And again, the moment that I'm seeing that I'm so excited for is young people willing to put our jobs on the line for dignity in the workplace, for democracy in the workplace. And we are going to lose most of these fights in the beginning. And if we're not prepared to support with solidarity, to go out there and hold a sign with your fellow Starbucks workers, get union cards in your own workplace and start unionizing there, regardless of what your employer may say or think, then this moment is not guaranteed to last. It's not going to last forever. So what I'm here to say, and what I'm here to do, and what my mission is in this moment, is to make sure that people know that our time is limited, and to know that these moments are precious, and that these workers are precious, that these organizers are precious, that these young people are precious, and they deserve the grace and space, our time, our investment, our energy, our knowledge, our wins, our losses, our shame. They need to be prepared for this moment and have our backing in order to be successful. Thank you.
I'm one of the professors So my name is Heiko Shagan. I'm a professor at Wayne State. I've been on the union's executive board for a long time. And I thought I would talk a bit about our experience at Wayne State and as well connect with you as faculty. What's the word that we use? Education workers. So a few words about our union first. It's a joint AAUP AFD chapter, local 6075. It was founded in 1972. We have our bargaining unit is about 1,670 people. The union itself is about 1,200 members. So we're at 71%. If you add the fair share, which is 80% of full dues, we get up to about 74%. Our number has stayed steady over the last 10 years or so, even though the bargaining unit number has shrunk as university has not rehired, especially on the academic staff side. Though, and I should say, we're faculty and academic staff. It's an unusual combination at Wayne State, but that's how we are. I'll tell you about the challenges that we have, and then some of the ways in which we've tried to overcome them. To begin with, I think it's difficult to organize faculty. Just by our nature, we're solitary people. We spend all of our lives working or poring over books, working in cubicles, writing behind closed doors in our offices. The idea of going out and beyond sort of an intellectual going out, to actually physically go out and work with other people, struggle with other people, hold hands with other people, be outside picketing with other people, not part of the formula. And so getting faculty, and at Wayne State, academic staff are much more engaged than faculty are in general in anything that has to do with doing something public. And then on top of it, people who come to as young faculty, that whole process of being hired involves being told you're great, the whole by the chair and by the dean, which is administration. And so the entire time they're interviewing and being taken to dinner and being told, we love you, we're so happy you're coming here. It's a close relationship with administration that we don't get to see. And so the need for a union, when you're being told everything is great and we're so happy you're here, seems like a faraway issue for a lot of the younger faculty, especially if they weren't, as graduate students, part of a union, or in some way, had a mindset of unions. So we have both of these challenges. And there is a cultural issue as well. The most difficult areas where we organize are the medical school and engineering. There's a very distant culture there in terms of working with unions. We are, however, a strong union, I say. I would say. We've stopped a number of things. We challenge things. We have paid staff. We do contract bargaining. The danger for us is that we fall sometimes into the trap of becoming contract bargaining agents. That is, we activate ourselves when a contract is on the table. All of a sudden, faculty and academic staff are listening because salary and dollar amounts and healthcare is on the table. But then the rest of the time, the other 2 years between contracts or 3 years between contracts, we sometimes are not as visible, are not as active, are not as engaged. And I think this is a mistake in the long run. I don't know if you face this issue here as well. I'm guessing you do. I'm guessing it's not just unique to us. The trouble, the difficulty though, is what to hang that hat on, what to use to create energy and engagement and interest when there is no contract that you're talking about. This is where the ideas of labor come in. This is where the idea of labor rights and human rights, as you mentioned, come in. This is where you have to think of a movement. It's not enough to write an article that's powerfully political. You need to also physically individually be engaged in something beyond yourself. This is a tall order, though. This is not an easy thing to do, and this is what we've been working on the last few years, to create more of this, as opposed to waiting until the contract comes around. This is, I think, the way in which our members see us. This is the way in which they see us be active. This is the way they see us working. This is the way they see us struggling. And I think this is the trust that you can build with your members, so that when you go to bargain, they will trust that you've done the best that you can do. Because otherwise there's no way. You can't just convince them on these things, because they could always say, why didn't we make more? Why didn't this, wasn't this in there? This trust, I think, is going to be based on the ideology of labor and not just bargaining for a contract kind of operation. And so what we've done, one of the things that we've done that you have started at Oakland is to create a coalition of other unions. There are 14 unions at Wayne State. We're one of them. But there is also, for example, the groundskeepers, the food service workers, the police union, the electricians, the operating engineers. And so, about 4 or 5 years ago, and I was instrumental in getting this really activated at Wayne State, we created a coalition. We have a logo. We meet regularly. We have events together where we work together on projects. The idea of a coalition is that idea that it's not just your contract that you're bargaining for, but that you're fighting with other people for general rights of everyone. That this is a movement that you're part of as a faculty member, not just your contract that you're waiting to sign. You know, ideas inspire people, not checkboxes, not dollar signs. And so you need the ideas to create this interest and energy. We picked an issue on campus to rally around. That was the elevators issue at Wayne State. There were half of our elevators were not working. It affected everyone. And so it was something all unions would come together to push as an item. And we picked one of the Board of Governors meetings. We came en masse, we had like people with t-shirts, in the back with signs, and I gave a speech to the Board of Governors to create this kind of a movement and energy. And we publicized it to all of our members so they could see what we were doing. The activation of this, creating this coalition that was active, eventually led us, right after COVID, the administration wanted to fire about 80 people from their positions. None of them were our union. There were other unions across campus. But because we had a coalition, we banded together. We used our connections on the Board of Governors because our union, the faculty union, is by far the biggest one. And we stopped it. We shamed the president into trying to do this right after COVID, when a lot of these people had actually come to work every day, putting their own lives in danger. And we were able to stop the administration from firing 80 people that were not our own union. This is the power of a coalition, but beyond that, it's the power of the idea that you're in a struggle with other people. And this is one of the ways in which we're hoping to have our own faculty become engaged when there's no contract at stake. So that when the contract comes around, they're actually energized with the idea of a struggle and a movement. Similarly, we're active in the Metro AFL-CIO. I'm actually for the Metro AFL-CIO. It's other unions. I've been going to those meetings. We let our own members know what the AFL-CIO is doing. We're organizing a conference on campus in September. We're going to invite all the other higher education unions to Wayne State, AAUP and AFT, so that we can actually sit down and get to know one another as unions. Stream the whole thing live to our members, and discuss legislative policy for higher ed for our unions. Because right now, it's surprisingly, we don't have any idea about legislative policy for our higher ed. If I ask you, I think, Amy, what would be the 3 top legislative priorities for your union, you would probably struggle to figure out what those would be. You don't So we did. We struggled with it. We now that Michigan's legislature is entirely in the hands of Democrats, but now that all the labor laws are being pushed, there's only one thing that's being pushed for higher ed, and that is the right to organize the research assistants at the University of Michigan. We don't have an agenda of anything else. I mean, there's nothing else that we care about. There's nothing else that laws that we can push through. And so we need to sort of think bigger. We need to organize ourselves. We need to work together. This has multiple benefits. One is that we can put together a legislative agenda that we can take to the AFT to push forward. It's also a way for us to know one another, to support one another, And it's a way to get our members to become engaged as well as they learn of the broader world of labor and struggle and of rights that creates greater momentum and energy so that when we get to the bargaining moment, so when we get to the striking moment, everyone is on board and ready to go. There's a lot more I could say, but I just want to give you an idea of the kinds of issues that we're facing as an academic union at Wayne State, and the way in which we're thinking the best way to overcome it is. And that is not to become, collective bargaining contract bargaining agent, but to actually become, a fight, people who are struggling for the rights of everyone, labor rights and human rights. Thank you.
I'm going to bring it back down to the table. But all the panelists so far have spoken on some really important things. Congressman Andy Levin, we're talking about the importance of labor law reform in maybe opening the floodgates for organizing. Carly talking about the importance of seizing the moment we have where there's such strong support for unions, and talking about the need for coalitions and actually having a perspective beyond just being another insurance company for workers, but actually being a fighting organization centered on bringing people together. One of the things I think a lot about, having worked in unions in a couple different ways now. You said swearing was okay, right? So I'll say that. I worked a lot of shit jobs, I'll be honest. I worked as a custodian. I've worked as a barista, which despite Starbucks's, corporate image is glorified fast food. And now I work in a warehouse. I've also worked as a full-time organizer on staff for a union. And one of the things I would always confront whenever I talk to anyone about organizing, about unions or anything, is like, why aren't we doing it yet? Right? There is the argument that the restrictiveness of labor law in this country is a really big deterrent to people, and that's true. There are things that, once you actually start to organize, you immediately run up against. But at least in my experience, the first thing that's stopping people is not thinking about whether or not they'll have to pay union dues by mandate or whether or not they'll get fired for striking. Well, that's part of it. The more fundamental thing is that, one, they don't know how to organize, and two, people seem apathetic. They're like, oh, I don't want to come to this union meeting. I don't want to come to this organizing committee meeting. I'm sure, raise your hand in here if you felt like, people have been unplugged from your union, or like, why aren't more people coming to meetings? Why aren't more people energetic about this, right? Like, I'm sure we've all experienced that. I'm sure as teachers, you guys get that with students a lot, right? At least when you're talking about workplace organizing, I found it's fear is the number one thing. Fear because most people have not seen in their lives what fighting together, banding together against your boss looks like. And I feel in terms of really taking advantage of this opportunity and seizing the moment, the obligation we have as unionists, and especially as young people looking for ways to not only get involved in the labor movement, but to just generally avoid, a century of global catastrophe from climate change and everything. That's going to take people stepping up in ways that they otherwise might not right now. It's going to take bravery. It's going to take confidence. And there are going to be people who find that confidence individually first, but our job, I feel, is to help give others confidence and inspire them to take action. When I started at Wayne State, I got involved in the YDSA. I was a socialist before that, but once I got involved there, I actually saw a path to seeing how being someone with politics and a vision in mind can actually inspire people, and I can actually direct that work and that energy in a useful way. I don't just have to be angry about this all the time. And I met some incredible people who have been fighting in the labor movement for decades at that point. And not just fighting against their boss, but often, half the time, fighting against union leadership. People who, when they were trying to organize in the Teamsters to try and make it more democratic, Hoffa and his gangsters basically sent a bunch of thugs to break up their meetings. And this was back in the 70s. So these were people who had the vision in mind of, we want to bring people together. We want to teach people how to fight, but what are the first barriers that we have to overcome, right? And for them, what they decided was the first barriers they had to overcome was actually turning their unions into fighting unions. And to me, that's one of the main goals we have in the union movement today. And there's some pretty historic things happening right now. Just a couple years ago, the Teamsters, they voted out the administration that came from that Hoffa legacy of basically gangsters. And they voted in a president, Sean O'Brien, who has been publicly, willingly, and very energetically talking about carrying out that strike at UPS. And that only happened because the members of those unions decided to organize and to take power back. Who here, raise your hand if you know what's happening in the UAW right now. Probably does, a handful. Pretty exciting things. The vote's tomorrow? So the vote they're counting is for the presidency of the UAW. That is the first vote that has happened for the presidency of that union since Walter Reuther took leadership back in the 50s. Ever since then, that union, for all its accomplishments, but let's be frank, a lot of its failures too, has been controlled by an administration caucus that has overseen decades of concessions at this point. And the final straw that broke the camel's back was that corruption scandal that happened back in 2019 when it figured out that a bunch of those union leaders were basically taking bribes from the company. And members of that union, of the UAW, a number of them actually graduate employees across the country, decided to organize and to take advantage of that opportunity, and it looks like they're going to win. A 600 vote margin out of 120,000 votes casted. Tiny margin. But when Sean Frayne, the president, takes the presidency, they're going to be staring down contracts with the big three, and they're going to have a chance to not just do the usual thing of, get people rallied around, wave pro picket signs, but actually turn it into a fighting moment, right? We're seeing things come together. We're seeing changes in our unions happening. We're seeing new unions with new militancy, like at Amazon and Starbucks being organized. And it's the same question of getting people not to feel afraid to take on that fight. I'm really excited, as everyone here on this panel is, and I'm sure as everyone in this room is, that right to work looks like it's finally going to be shot dead after 10 years in Michigan. But to be frank, there's two issues with that. One, the other threats we're staring down in terms of labor law, in my opinion, make right to work look like a paper cut. There is a Supreme Court ruling coming down the pipeline. Keep in mind, federally, we have a conservative-dominated court, 6-3, where some Teamsters, I think in Washington, got in a fight with a concrete company, and the company sued them, saying when you went on strike, you damaged the property of our company. That case has been pushed all the way up to the Supreme Court, and not just if, but when it gets ruled in favor of the company, we're looking at a totally new labor law landscape where employers might have a lot more leeway to sue unions and to sue workers for striking. If they're able to justify that the strike caused any sort of property damage. That could very well hurt, if not take away, our legal right to strike in this country. And I know that's dying. That's a horrible thing to consider, but that is the barrel of the gun we're staring down, right? But, you know, that can seem hopeless, but when we look back in history and we look back at when the union movement in this country exploded and inspired people, it was not happening, like Andy Levin said, often with the approval or encouragement of current union leadership. Often it happened semi-legally, to be frank. The organizing that happened in the old auto factories and in the steel factories was done in secret. It was led by, you know, young people, often socialists, to be frank, but in coalition with people who may have not called themselves socialists, but had a fighting spirit within them. And they organized their co-workers. They inspired them to take action in spite of their fear. You know, back then, it wasn't just you'd be afraid of getting fired for strike, you would get beat up by company thugs and like Henry Ford's like security in the factories, right? These were really dire circumstances that people were organizing in, and nonetheless, massive strikes happened that pulled in not just huge factories like the one that happened at Flint, the sit-down strike that founded the UAW, a semi-legal strike to be frank, but they pulled in all elements of the community around them, usually just through direct connections to the people they had. I think about a Teamsters local in Minneapolis that went on strike on the 30s. And one of the ways they built up the confidence of those workers to go on strike was that they talked to the workers and they got them to actually organize their wives, because this was a lot of men working in the warehouse at the time. They formed these women's auxiliary committees that were doing solidarity work for their husbands in the warehouse. And it wasn't just out of sympathy, but at that point, once they had these committees, once they were running these nursing tents for men who were getting beat up at the strike line by police, and also doing a lot of radio calling to coordinate trucks to stop scabs from coming in to the job. You know, a lot of these women felt empowered and part of the union themselves, even though they weren't working in it. They brought in thousands of supporters across Minneapolis. Tens of thousands of people were going on a strike in that city. And it got to the point that even the pro-labor governor of Minnesota at the time, I think his name was Frank Murphy, or Governor Olson, my bad. He was a pro-labor governor. He was a third-party candidate. It was a pro-labor party. He still called in the National Guard to put down those workers. And they still persisted, and they still won. Because they, like many other workers at the time, did not go through the new labor laws to get their unions. Actually, that's when union elections were first guaranteed, was in the 30s. But most of the strikes that happened at that time, those explosive strikes that founded a lot of the unions, the biggest unions we have today, those were strikes just to get the unions recognized, right? And the only reason that happened is because, again, there were people willing to step up to the challenge, willing to be brave enough to risk it, to be frank. You know, there was a elected I was here to speak about 2 months ago, talking about why they weren't being more vocally socialist in office, because this is someone who's a member of DSA, a socialist organization, if you don't know. And they were saying, well, you know, my job is to govern, and you know, if I'm too loud about it, I risk getting unelected, which is fair, right? That is something a lot of people in office are worried about, right? Even, it's not like we have people waving big red flags around across the streets all the time, right? Like this, you know. that kind of mentality is growing, but it's still, there's room for it to grow in this country. But I also know that as a shop floor organizer, who doesn't have a union at this point, who's doing a lot of my work, on wraps, I could get fired at any minute if I get found out. Lose my job, lose my income, lose the health insurance, and that is what stops a lot of people, especially, understandably, a lot of older union leadership in this country from taking that risk. If you go and try to push an illegal strike, what will happen to your union? Will it get decertified? Will it, its assets get seized? The railway workers back in November, who here doesn't know what happened with the railway workers last year? So everyone knows that those workers were going to go on strike. A kind of strike, not just a little one, right? Not just like the good ones, that were easy to rally behind, like the Starbucks workers, which, I was on strike too. But that was the kind of strike that was going to disrupt the whole economy, right? 30% of the GDP moved through those rails, right? And they knew, as did the president, as did the companies, as everyone in Congress knew, if they went on strike, that would have actually made things come to a halt. And the union leadership, honestly, in spite of their membership, decided not to push through with that strike. Now compare that to what's happening in France today, right? Who here knows what's happening in France? Who here doesn't know what's happening in France? It's okay to raise your hand. So, imagine this. The French government just is trying to pass a law that's saying we are going to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64, right? First of all, crazy me. I don't think I'm ever going to retire in this country, at least not with things looking the way they are now. I know a guy at the warehouse who's 78 who came back to work just to pay for his kid's school. In France, they said they're going to raise the retirement age to 64. They have unions all across the country, anywhere from moderate conservative unions to communist unions, all in agreement now that they need to fight this. And they are, if you go to France, you will notice day-to-day life there is tougher because many of those workers are on strike, fighting. These are open-ended strikes too. They're going to fight until they get a guarantee from the government that they won't raise the retirement age. These are transit workers going on strike, railway workers going on strike, workers in the energy sectors going on strike. Willing to take that risk, willing to actually have the quality of life go down for a bit, but because they know there's something bigger at stake, right? So, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I think as a young person, and a lot of young people here in this room, a lot of us have pretty dire ideas about what the future's going to look like, right? The future in this country, the future in the world, the future of the climate, and there's really two ways to deal with that. You can either try to hold on to what you got, right? Now, something that wasn't mentioned when I got introduced was actually I'm a graduate of Wayne State with a degree in math and physics. I got college honors. I was on track to go to grad school. If I want to, at this point, I could still go get a technical degree, work for some defense contractor programming all their missiles and everything. I could make tons of money. I personally might be able to have a secure life, right, with that. My family might, right? My kids might be able to even have enough money to carry on. But what about their kids? What about their grandkids, right? When the climate's falling apart, right? The country is falling apart, like what kind of future is guaranteed from that? I think that's something worth thinking about. I think it's dire, but it is really worth considering. Like, what is it going to take for us to actually make sure we not only have a future for our kids and grandkids, but for their family as well, for their friends as well, for their communities and really the world they live in. Right? It's going to take us being brave, and it's going to take us risking things. Starting maybe with being a little bit more aggressive in our unions themselves and demanding that they fight, right? With right to work gone, this is one opportunity to think about. As unions roll in those new contracts that have those security clauses that mandate union dues again, I'm sure you guys are going to talk to coworkers who haven't been paying union dues. Also, although it shouldn't apply to you guys because you're public sector, that's under federal law, you know, but private sector workers, they're going to talk to their coworkers and they're going to say, you know, what's the union doing for me? Why am I paying dues now? You could say, well, it's the law you pay dues, but you could also say, no, good question. What is the union doing? Is it going to, you know, rise to the moment? You know, in the UAW, it can't just say, well, the union's been giving concessions since 1970 because of right to work, which got passed in 2012. You know, they have to say, we actually have to fight. We have to teach people how to fight in their workplace, not just at the contract, right? Teach them how to work together, how to talk to people that they don't, you know, agree with or even like at times, right? Who they have strong disagreements with. But how do you find a way to work together anyway? How do you find something common between you that you can build a relationship and trust on? And how can that be the seed for something even stronger and even better to come? So, thank you.
Thank you all. We do have some time for Q&A, so I'm going to probably just be handing mics, so there might be a lot of me running around like a silly person, but anyway, I apologize for anything. Do you have any questions, comments, concerns that you'd like to raise? Yes? Only if you don't have your big outside voice.
Oh, I can use my teacher voice in this room. Okay. So my name's Kayla. I'm chair of the Young Democratic Socialists of America chapter here at OU. Currently, we're running a raise the wage campaign against the board of trustees. If you haven't signed that petition or heard about it, I have a very obnoxiously red tape back there that you should check out. But our question is, like, this campaign has been really great. It's a pressure campaign against the board of trustees, which will end as soon as the board of trustees decides the new budget for next school year. So I guess my question to Nick or anybody on the panel is, like, what is your advice for student organizers working on this campaign to keep the momentum going?
So there are so many supporters in your community that you would not think would be supportive, but are supportive. So I know that like there are organizations like the Metro AFL where you know they've got meetings and people present to them all the time on stuff. I know they do at meetings in our neck of the woods. I'm an organizer. My region is mostly like Saginaw, Flint, like the mid-Michigan area northward. So I know at our regional meetings, people come to us all the time with random stuff sometimes, like raising money for certain charities, or it's a millage, or it's teachers saying, hey, we need your guys' help. Help us come to this commissioners meeting or this the school board meeting. They will help you. They will help you. And you know who is on the board of trustees. I know who's on the board of trustees for Oakland University. They need pressure. And there's a lot of people in union leadership who know these people by name as well and by their history. So I have no doubt that there are people where, if mobilized and aware, they would definitely show up to help y'all out. So that's the work of organizing as well. But it's I think getting the word out, which I'm sure you guys have been doing a lot of. But don't be afraid to say like, oh, we only need to hear from students. Like Oakland University is a public university. There's a huge community component here, and I believe that there are almost no boundaries to that component. If the Board of Trustees can have alumni meetings where they go to 5-star hotels in Florida and raise money from alumni, then you can go anywhere you want and have people show up to their trustees meeting and ask them to support fair wages for the workers that go to their school, and also hiring enough people to run your own night watch program and your own school safety program. So yes, don't be afraid to say it to too many people is my advice, and don't be afraid to think that like you have to somehow geographically restrict yourselves. I don't think that that's a concern for you guys. So you are fighting the good fight, and there are a lot of people who will be on your side. That you have my contact information, I'd be more than willing to put you in the direction of some organizations that I know of that would probably be supportive.
I'll just add that you can go in the other direction as well, here locally, and add, broadening the circle, but also narrowing it. I mean, the other coalition, that's why we have a coalition, so that we can support each other on causes. And YDSA at Wayne State is active, and we invite them to our meetings as well, and we work together on signing. When you present a petition signed by all the unions at Wayne State, for example, it's a powerful statement to the good. In our case, in addition, when we can get the student senate involved, so YDSA is much smaller than the entire student senate at Wayne State. The student senate tends to be more conservative, or not conservative, but less willing to take risks and put themselves up. But that's a lot of people if they can sign on to an initiative. And boards, at least our board, is afraid of the administration of students organizing in large numbers. So I would also go down locally and organize, at the faculty and the other unions and at the student senate equivalently to run it.
I'll just say really quick, I think you guys are already trying to do a little bit of this, but reach the student workers themselves, right? Like they have the most immediate interest in getting the minimum wage raised. So think about like how we can reach out to them. How can we make events that are appealing for them to come to? I'm sure everyone here who's put together any sort of meeting, especially a union meeting, has learned that like the secret trick to get people to come is making sure they know there's food there. So, things like that, social events to bring people in, making sure, as much as you can that student workers themselves are invested in the fight. And then, tapping on allies within the university, but also at Wayne State. Like I said, they had a YDSA there. There are student workers at Wayne State. And people at Wayne State in general who think it's pretty pathetic that there's jobs that still pay $10 an hour there. So I just want to second everything that has been said, and also make sure there's food for people.
I agree with all this, but I have something different. I have a different idea. Creativity. Doing things that are a little crazy, a little unexpected. TikTok, whatever social media, but the things I remember from campaigns over my whole 40 plus years of organizing, most of it's not only before social media, like before email, literally. Like when ILGWU, the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, which was a predecessor of Unite, which was a predecessor of Unite here, when the manufacturers of caps and gowns at my college, where the workers were on strike, we had the seniors sign a petition that said they would go Anyway, it was in the heyday of streaking. Anybody know what streaking is? Really don't. YouTube? No, it's, running around naked in public, okay? And maybe it's a thing, but, my youth was the true heyday of streaking. It was on the cover of Time magazine, and that's what determined what was a big thing in those days. Anyway, so we got a majority of the senior class to say they would go. We used words that were kind of ambiguous. So were they saying they just weren't going to wear a cap and gown, which was bad enough to the administration? That would be a humiliation to them. Anyway, they switched. They didn't admit we had anything to do with it, And then, in law school, we created something called the Sojourner Truth Squad, which is like a guerrilla group to humiliate the dean into trying to diversify the faculty. And we did things like create a fake letter from him to the whole campus community. And we stuffed the student boxes and all this. And it said, and it was really plausible, it said, and the fact that, all you immature people are demanding things from us and doing graffiti in the tunnels, which we were doing. Anyway, that's nothing to do with this. We, in our appropriate way, have been working seriously on this all the time. And I'm proud to announce today this following 8 people that are being brought in as faculty, and they were like this. Lonnie Bonnier, who later did come, but this was earlier, and, you know, Mari Matsuda, and whatever we thought like, the superstars were. And anyway, just get you all, just whoever the activists are, whoever's involved, student workers, whoever involved in this, and do something that people won't expect, that will get media attention, that will just create buzz, and that will freak out the administration.
Yes.
I'm going to step away from the mic so I don't overload it. I'm Ethan Lemon-Pace. I'm the legislative majority here in the Student Congress. I'm the vice chair of YDSA, and most importantly, UFCW strong. Can I get a lukewarm cheer for that? Not the best union, but still a union. My question is, how are we as Metro Detroiters uniquely suited to take advantage and ride the wave of this surging tide of unionization efforts? How is our history able to inform our present, I guess, is what I'm wondering.
Yes, because, okay, there's two sides to that. So your question applies like, yes, there is history here, and we have this thing called union density currently here in Metro Detroit that is really helpful. I think Darren Camilleri, as a state senator, his district, which includes downriver, has the highest union density in the state. And he talked about that, oh my gosh, was that last night? How was last night? I was there for a long time. It was a legislature, right? It's a long time. Everyone gave speeches. But you know, you have a lot of supportive legislators, which matters a lot. You also have a lot of supportive people in organizations like I'm with the state Fed AFL, with the Metro AFL, and people who will come out and show up, and that matters. But I also want to say, like, that doesn't mean that, you know, it's always going to be a fight. And so here in Metro Detroit, I helped with the Comrades in Coffee campaign with the Great Lakes Coffee Roasting Company, and that failed. That unionization effort failed. Like, there were 25 coffee shop workers who did literally everything right. We tried to strike for recognition. We had a legal strategy. I learned more about labor law than I ever thought existed. More about LLCs that I ever wanted to know, and about sneaky ways to do things like a Texas two-step, which is basically where you bankrupt your own company, change its name, reopen it under the same location with the same leadership, same management, same everything, except you avoid legal responsibility or any responsibility to do things like, usually it's so they don't have to pay out pensions or retirement stuff, to basically take all of your liabilities and balloon them into a business, and then kill that business, and then you have a new business that's, you know, just doesn't have any liability. And they did that with the union, with the workers, all to avoid 25 coffee shop workers going on strike. And this was something that we thought was a locally owned coffee shop that was right in the heart of Midtown Detroit. That was a target that we could go after with all the massive support of a union town. Detroit's a union town, right? And however, what we thought was one LLC turned out, and we only found out because of PPP loan data, that they actually had 3 LLCs that actually were underneath an umbrella corporation that had 50 shadow investors, including like developers and banking firms. It was freaking weird, man. Like, it was weird. But the problem is that they were able to successfully stall a unionization vote that all the workers wanted and subvert the right to a union. And they did it legally. And they got away with it because we need to change labor laws. We need to challenge a lot of union structures and institutions, because systemically that should not have been able to happen. And when we have a country where 70% of us support unions and support workers' right to form a union, that should not have been able to happen, but it did. Those workers were on strike for what, like 160 days or something? Insane. And they didn't even get back pay. The company admitted that they illegally fired them, and then they bankrupted the company. What? So, but now we're seeing, but then again, it's so important to have those fights in the first place, because Starbucks is trying to do the same thing. They tried to bankrupt certain franchise locations to avoid the union. And the NLRB just smacked him up and said, no, you're not going to do that. And Howard Schultz, actually, you have to now record a video and present it to every single employee, telling them all that you're a jerk and that Personally, I think 2023, it's on my bingo card, Howard Schultz is going to jail. I really hope so. Because I think that would be really funny, and also, I think it'd be funny, but I also think that the labor movement we need corporate CEOs who subvert the law and break the law, because that is what he is doing, to go to jail. If any of those workers stole a piece of equipment or has been caught making cups of coffee for themselves without putting it in or going through their process, or gets caught, taking some tips for themselves, they get fired, and a lot of times the company calls the freaking cops and they go to jail. What does Howard Schultz get for firing illegally dozens of workers? Stock buybacks, yeah, nothing. So until there's real punishments for these people. But again, to your question, what I wanted to run back to that, yes, union density matters and all that support does really matter. But even with all of that, the possibility of losing is still incredibly high. But that doesn't mean we stop trying. That means we try harder and we do more and we do better. Because for every single 100 people who try to form a union, if one gets in, that tips the scales our way. Then 2 gets in, then 4 gets in, then 8 gets in, right? So we have to strategically make sure that we are, again, supporting every effort as hard and as much as we can, but union density and all those supports are no guarantee of success.
I would just add, I made, in my comments, I mentioned the fact that there isn't much for higher ed in the current push for the legislative changes. There's a long list, about 30, 35 laws that are being pushed through. This is the time to get these things done. This is the time to fix what was done wrong under Snyder in particular. But higher ed doesn't have much at this point. So a lot of K through 12, but not much in higher ed. I will say one thing though, that I personally disagree with the strategy. To me, this is, so the frame for this effort is restore our rights. And as a minor point to me, anyone who's relatively young, any of my students don't even understand what was lost in the past to be restored now. And secondly, restore means already you've lost something, and it's like a defeatist sort of approach to the thing. I wish we had a better framing for the entire effort. But what bothers me more than that is the fact that the strategy at this first stage, this first year of laws being passed, is one to just have it happen under the radar. Let's get these things restored, and then in the future we'll fight for new kinds of rights. We know we're going to pass 20, 30 laws that protect labor rights. We know we're going to be successful. Why not just put this on a banner? Why not publicize this? Why not really affirm the power and strength of labor? That here we are, we are strong, we're united, we're going to push back, we're not going to take this. Instead of flying under the radar, instead of being worried about marginal, House seats and Senate seats being lost because of being too loud about this, some important legislation has already been passed in Lansing, and yet it's a small article in a newspaper that you might look for to see, as opposed to being trumpeted everywhere as labor on its victory march. I wish we were doing this as our approach to this year in particular, where all these wins we know what we're going to get. And so I have a personal disagreement with the general AFL-CIO approach to how we're going about this series of wins that we have.
I agree with that.
I have a related question about that. I was wondering about the role of the media, how do they report about what you're doing? Are they being helpful? I'm guessing no. What kind of difficulty are they causing? I'm talking about the written press, TV, or media in general.
I mean, traditionally, newspapers and so on had a business section, a labor section. And then they shut labor beat. They shut it down and put it under what section? Business. The business section of news media is pro-business usually. That's the whole approach to it. And so the labor beat has gone away, and labor coverage has weakened, and news media have a difficult time reporting, I think, well on labor. Part of it is labor's own fault. That is, when you go to a corporation, they have someone, an officer in charge of it, PR person in charge of talking in a formal office, in a prepared statement. Whereas labor is often not as well organized on those things, and so might say a few words, and it doesn't look as put together and as organized. And what you're doing is you're leaving an impression with the viewers at the end of the day. I mean, if you want to change public opinion, it matters how you speak, it matters how you present, it matters what it looks like, in the setting. And so I think we do better in those things, but it's traditionally been an uphill battle, I think, to get the right kind of coverage on labor and its efforts in the media. I'm not ascribing it to media bias against labor, I'm not going that far, but I think there is a disadvantage for labor to get the right kind of coverage and to get its winner. And running under the radar in the current push doesn't help. Instead of being upfront and saying, here, we're winning this, we're winning that, we're doing this for you, this is our future that we're ensuring for ourselves and our next generation, so quietly under the radar. I don't think we do ourselves a favor sometimes.
Yeah, to the communication strategy with the legislature, I totally agree with you. If I was deciding communication strategy, that would be different. But because right now we have a he who must not be named, like Voldemort strategy with right to work, where we don't want to say right to work because if you know anything about that legislation, obviously the National Right to Work Committee has been very well funded for like almost 2 generations now to go after the specific piece of legislation. So right to work is a bit of a misnomer, which is why we're fighting to repeal right to work. Although that exactly right. So there's a lot of ways to talk about that in the AFL's. I would say the state strategy is informed by polling, and they don't want to say the word, but we're repealing it now. So there's a lot. It's up in the air. We're all trying to figure out how to do that. But I agree. But I would say that the bigger you go and the higher you go in media, you definitely find an anti-labor bias because it's an anti-worker bias. I would point to the rail workers union debacle of last year. If you couldn't turn on the TV without hearing the phrase "wreck the economy." Well, if you go on strike, you're going to wreck the economy. Well, I don't know, maybe the investors that have been doing stock buybacks for themselves and basically cornering the market that is an essential service, relying on the government essentially to keep down the rights of their own workers. Maybe that's what has been going to wreck the economy. Also, I'd love to ask residents of East Palestine, Ohio, what they think about that. So, we can't, no one should be providing cover for billionaire corporations to eke out more and more profits, putting our health and safety at risk, everyone's health and safety at risk. First and foremost, those workers. Derailments affect the workers the most. There was a derailment a couple weeks after East Palestine that killed the train operator. I think that was in Texas. There have been 12 derailments since then, right? So, it's horrifying, and giving these companies cover, we know why they do that. It's because these media organizations are themselves multinational organizations that have stock buyback operations going on who own them. So, and there's no right, left, center to it. That's just there's no political reality. It's reality. It's corporate reality. It's the reality that you turn on the TV and it's a message that somebody has paid for. And the only way you can back that I see is having our own strategies within our personal circles, and of course in your organizational circles. If you are a member of a union or other places where we practice democracy, we're all members of a democracy here in America. Communicating that in the ways that you feel is effective, because yes, these media corporations, they're very far away from us, and they're very well funded. Okay, you go. You guys get it. I'm not gonna fight the fly.
First off, there's always going to be the capitalist class is always going to have more money than organized labor, and certainly more than the rank and file of these unions themselves. They will always have money to fill the airwaves, to pay their Ben Shapiros to do their propaganda about right to work, to send Steven Crowder to Michigan to protest right to work just so he can get punched into the jaw by a union electrician. On the flip side, I will say, at least for like labor media, it has had there's been good and bad sides to kind of the way, like in the last 5, 6, 7 years, there's been more and more reporting about like labor struggles. More and more young people see it. I know certainly, anyone who goes to a YDSA meeting, knows about it, but even friends of mine who are, liberal, but not necessarily all about the union stuff, they know, like, for example, Howard Schultz and the union busting he's doing. They know, like, at an Amazon warehouse, they've heard about the stories about people having to clean the bottles and everything. I found that doesn't always translate into the workplace itself. There's actually often a bit of a disconnect, especially as you get kind of lower on the wage scale, between people's media perceptions of unions and like the workers' perceptions of unions themselves. In my experience, honestly, it's been a bit of a crapshoot here, whether or not someone having worked at a union job, even here in Michigan, leaves them with a good impression or a bad impression. Because for all the media coverage of it, their experiences are dictated by their actual experiences with those unions. But people are still listening to media. There's like all these new forms of entertainment and media, social media and everything that really is shaping people's worldviews, but no one's listening to the same social media. I think about how in YDSA, starting with my age cohort, but certainly as more and more younger people have come in, there's been a number of people who said, I would, watch this Twitch streamer who played this game who was a socialist, and he would talk about this stuff, and that's what got me onto it. I know for me, before I ever did any sort of actual work, it was just being on social media and like being in those circles that got me thinking about this stuff. The problem is that stuff does not necessarily always reach the workers themselves, right? Because for political disagreements, they don't listen to certain people, or they just don't have as much time to spend paying attention to the news and honestly getting angry about it, which is what I did for my first 4 years of college. The way to reach workers is going to be a lot tougher. There is one tried and true method, which the people I've talked to, they always come back to, is you kind of need like a shop floor newsletter. You need something that people can pick up and read, and they can like learn about what's happening in their union, but also what's happening in other workplaces. It had to be exciting. The Starbucks Workers Union, they publish stories about, they have a newsletter that publishes stories about fights that are happening at different Starbuckses. For workplaces that don't have unions, that if you can get an organizing committee in there, that if they have the trust of their coworkers and have a newsletter, that's an opportunity to talk with people about fights happening in other places, saying like, hey, these workers marched up to their boss in the middle of the shift. These people walked out of their shift and they should have got what they wanted. Maybe that's something we could do here, right? There's kind of older methods of reaching people that still work. It's just tougher, but.
We publish a newsletter too at Wayne State, and for both that reason, but also to let other members see the what's going on internally. And so we, for example, published the list of grievances that we faced in 1 year, not naming people, but putting the list of grievances so people can see that others are grieving in different departments, and it encourages them to actually be willing to stand up and come to the union for help. So both to share information, but also to encourage people to stand up for their rights.
Mm-hmm. And then the last form of communication I think is super important, that it's not on TV, it's not on news, it's just knowing the people in your life and talking to them about it. I have a number of old friends from high school and family members who floated through a Starbucks at one point, or they worked at a grocery store that, because they knew that I was, from union and stuff, they knew they could talk to me. Once, it was kind of a combination of them dealing with harsh conditions at their jobs, but also seeing the stuff in the news. Those things come together, and then that gives you an opportunity to actually talk about this stuff with people.
All right, so let me just say a couple brief things about those last two questions. We should lean way into our, history in Detroit, but it's a union town, it's great, but we have to go back to our roots of the kind of rank and file organizing that James is talking about to rekindle it, because Michigan has lost its place as one of the few most union-dense states. We're not Hawaii, New Jersey, New York, whatever, and we have to go back to our roots. The media, we lost the labor beat before the model of corporate media fell apart, and then it's been, a downward spiral since. But this fragmentation of media does have an upside, and there is a lot of great work being done out there by people to tell the stories of worker struggles, of strikes, of organizing campaigns, of bargaining campaigns. So that's something that's positive. But there's another element of what's been happening is that the idea that people are organizing at the companies everybody knows is really new. Starbucks, Amazon, and so forth, these biggest behemoths of this economy, at Google and elsewhere. And so when the workers started organizing in Bessemer, the Bessemer, Alabama warehouse of Amazon, I organized a congressional delegation to go down there. And then I went back down, and people were like, well, they're not gonna win, and so forth. I was like, I know, but that's not the only point. These very young, overwhelmingly African-American workers in Bessemer, Alabama are capturing the imagination of this country. And these workers who are salting and organizing are really, I have a huge amount of faith in them. Multiple members of my own family are salting or have been. People at this, the most important people on this panel and in this, in what's happening right now in the labor movement are people who are saying, you know what, I'm just gonna go to work and I'm gonna organize a union in my workplace with my sisters and brothers. And that is happening, and that is capturing the media's attention in a way that little else has in the labor movement in the last 10, 20 years, so I'm very hopeful about that.
Well, we have managed to use up all of our allotted time. And I see that we've already lost some people who go to 6:30 classes. But I want to, first of all, I want to get that out of my way. I would like to ask you all to give a nice round of applause for our speakers and yourself. Forward in a positive way. Yes, people on the executive committee are saying, oh yeah, I have ideas now. And so I very much want to thank you all for giving us your time and your expertise. I would also like to take a few moments to shamelessly advertise. The AAUP has a scholarship for students who are involved in community organizing. There are flyers on the tables. So if you have not already applied and you are a student, either undergraduate or graduate, please think about it. If not for this year, it will also be next year. We had some freshmen who said, oh, I haven't done enough yet. That's okay. Start working on your resume now. Think about it, because the more success we have, the more we will do the next year. So, make us go bankrupt. No, don't do that.